That smells so freaking good.
I was just thinking that.
Well, since it's springtime here in Dixie, and I hadn't made a rib video in quite some time, I figured I might as well fire up the smoker, invite over some friends, and cook us some baby back ribs. First things first for me is a trip to the local box store. Around here, that's BJ's. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert, but when I look at loin backs or baby backs, I kind of inspect them to make sure that the bones are broken or odd looking, and I make sure there's a good layer of meat and some marbling on top of the rib. Now, when I was in the store here, I saw they had a rack of spares cut in half, which is great for me because A, I've never cooked spares before, and B, spares don't fit very well on an 18-inch smoker. So I figured I'd make the purchase, bring them home, and try it out. Alright, so for this cook, I decided to change a few things and only use peach wood for smoke this time around. And generally I use hickory or a combo of hickory and cherry. But these videos would get kind of boring if I kept doing the same thing, and I wouldn't really be learning much. So since I found the peach at a local store, I figured I would try it out. Now peach, like any fruit wood, is much more mild than say mesquite, hickory, or oak, so I figured I'd throw in a couple extra chunks of it, and hopefully that would do the trick and give a good smoke flavor to the ribs. Now as for the WSM, I'll be burning about 5 to 8 pounds with Kingsford Blue Bag charcoal, water pan 3/4 full, and adjusting the lower vents to shoot for a pit temp of 235 degrees. Now for this cook, I'll be using the same initial steps as I do in episode 4, which requires dry brining and using Amazing Ribs Memphis Dust Rub. What I'm doing differently in this cook is taking a full rack of these baby backs and following a 2-2-1 method, and taking a half rack of these spares and following a 3-2-1 method. Now the reason behind me cooking all this and doing different styles is because, well, my neighbors are coming over and they might be like my wife and like ribs when the meat comes off the bone easily, more easily, when in actuality it's probably not supposed to. It should have a little bit of tug on the bone, but not be, chewy, obviously. And, this way it gives me a chance to experiment a little bit and try both methods and maybe work on my 2-2-1 because I'm not throwing it out the window. I know a lot of people use it, so even some pros use it, so it can't be totally bad. It's just, it's not what I'm liking at the moment. Okay, now that it's been 2 hours following that 2-2-1 method protocol, I'm going to pull off a full rack of these baby backs, lay down a bed of brown sugar, and cover these ribs with some Parkay and honey on both sides. Now once they're wrapped up tight, I'm going to put them back on the smoker. Yes, I put them on meat side up. Does it really matter? I don't know. I kind of just forgot. Since I'm not basting my other ribs, I figured I'd put some Parkay and honey on those as well. Alrighty, at the 3-hour mark, pulled out a half rack of spares, covered them with brown sugar, Parkay, and honey on both sides, wrapped them up tight, put them back in the smoker, and basted the other rib with some Parkay and honey. Alright, so around the 3.5 to 4-hour mark, I went ahead and pulled off this rack of baby backs that had been wrapped up for about 1.5 to 2 hours. Went ahead and unwrapped them and put them back on the smoker. Now, as you can see, they're not falling apart like they were maybe in episode 1 or 2, and I think that has to do with just being at a lower pit temp, around 235. Up to 250, they'd probably be falling apart. Okay, so after about 30 minutes or so, I decided to do a bend break test to see if the ribs were done. Now this rib that I'm grabbing here is the one that was never wrapped. You can see it's not that limp, only a very slight break in the skin or the meat of the rib. This rib, the wrapped rib, is much more flexible and you can obviously see a split in the meat. Plus the bones are protruding, all indications that the rib is either done or being close to being done. Now I did check the temperature of these ribs. The unwrapped one was in the 180s and the wrapped one was around 190. All this led me to believe that the unwrapped one needed more time, so I just decided to leave them both on there. So around about the 5-hour mark, I took off the half rack of spares that was wrapped, unwrapped it, and put it back on the lower grate. With that done, I decided to do another bend break test. This unwrapped rib, you can see, is not as flexible, but I could see a break in the meat or the skin. The bones were more protruded. This one obviously done very flexible. You can easily see the split in the skin or the meat and the bones coming out the bottom. You see there? I could have given the wrapped rib a little bit more time, but I just didn't feel like having one rib done more than the other one. So, I just figured let's just get this over with. Let's just eat already, So I removed the midsection and I put the ribs over the hot coals. Now on episode 4, I sauced them before I put them on the coals, and that's what I recommend you do. I just got distracted talking to folks and wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. I didn't burn the ribs by any means, but it's just better to do that. They're going to be less charred. You see a little char there on the bottom of the rib. It didn't hurt anything. It might actually give them a little more flavor, but I'm not trying to burn these things. So I recommend saucing them first and then putting them on the coals each side for about 30 seconds to caramelize the sauce. Now the sauce I'm using today is a Weber sauce. It's actually pretty thick stuff. I wasn't a huge fan of it. For some reason, like, it burned off here. Look at that. It's like gone on the other side of the rib. And, you know, I wasn't going to re-sauce it again. I just figured I'd leave it alone and we'd enjoy it that way. So there she is. It's all said and done. Going to bring these ribs in the house and cut them up and see how they are. Okay, so here we are back in the house, and I'm cutting up some of these ribs. And to be honest with you, I can't remember if this is the wrapped or unwrapped, but I believe it's probably the wrapped rib. To be honest with you, these ribs tasted the same. I really couldn't tell a huge difference between them. The wrapped rib might have been a little bit more tender and a little bit more easy to come off the bone. But they really were the same. I mean, I was actually very surprised. I think that has to do with the lower pit temp cooking on the 221 method. So as you can see here, the ribs have a good appearance to them, but not a real thick smoke ring and not a real dominant smoke flavor. I think that has to do with the peach wood. I'll probably steer away from it in the future. It wasn't bad, it's just different, you know. As you can see, got a good bite mark. The meat is still adhering to the bone, and everything tasted great. So last but not least, about 6 hours after I started this cook, it's time to pull these spares off. I didn't sauce them just because, well, I kind of was just tired and just figured, well, some folks don't in Memphis. Let's just leave them just with the rub alone. That darker one there is the one that was unwrapped, and this thick one here was the one that was wrapped. And you know, they turned out pretty good. I'm not crazy about spares, but hey, that's me. Anyways, I think most folks were happy. I mean, well, except for the cat. And as always, I hope you learned something. I know I certainly did. Thanks for watching, y'all.